Hello and welcome to Life Astrologer. I'm Anna Isabel, and today I have a wonderful practitioner of holistic healing with me. Her name is Beth Foley. Beth, welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me on your show, on your live broadcast. Fabulous. I'm really glad to be here, very excited.
Well then, let's have a look at your chart. So first off, I was just thinking about how much of the work you do is to do with the body. It's using the body as a way in to deal with emotional trauma, perhaps, that we could put it that way.
Yes, absolutely. Trauma, life events.
And I was just looking at the area of your chart that's linked with career, and there is Jupiter, Mercury, and Mars, all in Taurus there. So immediately what that tells me is that working with the physical is a part of your vocation, shall I say. And so it doesn't surprise me that you're working with the body. And it's really about the body communicating with you, isn't it, as to what's going on?
Yes.
So that's Mercury communication.
Yes, absolutely, totally. Because that's how I work, is literally communicating through the subconscious of the person who I'm working on. So it's through the body. The body talks, if you like. Yeah,
it's a really wonderful example of, we would say, mind-body connection. And in fact, when I'm looking at Mercury in Taurus, Mercury represents the mind and communication, and Taurus is very physical as well. So the two there marry very well. And then you've got Jupiter there in Taurus. And I always think about Jupiter as the planet that shows us where we put our faith. And you are putting your faith in the body, because you're allowing the body to do the talking.
Interesting, very interesting. Yes, and that is in a nutshell absolutely the truth. Yeah, because when I'm working with someone, I ask, if it's their colon, I ask their colon what's going on. Is it emotional? Is it something physical that's happened? Is it from past life even? Because all these different aspects, and people don't realize how many things affect us energetically. So I call myself a director of energy, as it were, because we're looking at all the different angles and then correcting it. So it's I might have to go and lock my door now.
I saw him walking past.
Yes, he's gone out in the garden. Whenever he hears me talking to someone, he gets a little bit jealous, we say.
Well, it doesn't surprise me that a dog would be part of your life, with the moon you've also got in the 6th house. And so so I'm just kind of skipping the subject, going with what just happened with your dog there, because I immediately looked at your 6th house. What's going on in there? The 6th house is the house we associate with pets.
Okay. Yes.
Having moon there, I just wonder whether you ever look at animals in a similar way.
Yes, I work with not just people, it's animals as well. Yes, so I mean, my dog was very poorly recently, and he was supposed to have a major operation, and I took him on the day to have the operation, and the vet was completely taken, blown away, because his cancer had completely cleared and he didn't have to have this major surgery. And it was all because she mentioned something to me, and I went, oh, she mentioned the word histamine, and I thought, oh, histamine, I've never thought about histamine being linked to cancer. And then I played with that. I talked to his body, and as soon as I rebalanced his histamine in his body, all these cancerous lumps just disappeared.
Wow.
It's amazing, isn't it?
That's what, and of course, animals are very receptive to energy healing because they have no idea what's going on. So they can't resist, they can't reject, you know, they just absorb.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That is wonderful. You have Aries on the midheaven, and the midheaven is very indicative also of career and vocation. So my guess is you would be somebody who's very driven and independent and entrepreneurial, shall we say, in the way that you work.
Absolutely, yes, definitely, definitely, because everybody's an individual, and so I've got one of the things I do in my work is I use a machine called the Genius, which is a biofeed machine, and it allows you to create libraries for you know, and you can do that around a person. So if someone says they've got XYZ problem, we can feed that information into my wonderful Genius as well, and it will just show what's going on. It's just incredible, absolutely incredible, you know. And it's shown me so much more, because for me, when we talk about ancestral and generations, they aren't the same as such, because they are, you know, generational, you're looking at your cousins, your aunts and uncles perhaps, but the ancestral, it goes way beyond that, way beyond that, you know. And so if you're going to a doctor, they're not going to ask you about your ancestral health, are they? They ask you, did your mum or dad have heart disease or diabetes? They don't look at the bigger picture, say, for example. And so this is why I love this work, because it just fills in all those little dots that seem to be missing when people are trying to understand what's created something, you know.
Well, it's interesting because, again, as I'm listening to you, there are so many things that I'm looking at your chart and thinking, oh yeah, and I'm coming back to the moon in the sixth house, because the sixth house, in addition to pets, also is about work, and it's, you know, how we work, what we, you know, and the moon sitting there is actually ruling your 12th house, which is the house to do with ancestry.
Ah, interesting.
Exactly as you describe it. It's not for immediate previous generations. It's going back, way back in time.
Yes.
That's what it represents. So I think for me, this is reading your chart in this way. I would guess that this is instinctive to you, that this is something that you may have already suspected that it worked like this, and then you stumbled on the information that says, yeah, it does.
Yes. And it's, for me, it's really interesting. I quite often have people, and they talk about things like dementia, and I'll say, did you have anybody in the family that was shell shock? And they look at me, why? And I say, because the knock-on effect would create this energy of dementia. And then once you start to unravel, as I call it, unfold and clear, things start to change, and it's just incredible, you know.
Yeah.
And the difference it makes then, you know, to people, and they suddenly go, what? I can't understand why my memories come back. But we block things out, don't we, as well?
We do.
You know, and so that's yes, it's interesting. So yes, the ancestors plays a big part for me, a huge part.
I can also see that, because when I then think about looking at sort of the more immediate family history, I would be looking at the fourth house, which is the IC, and that's ruled by Libra. So I go and I check where your Venus is in Cancer, which is exactly to do with family and heritage, etc. So you're starting there and you're working further back. It's also very close to the North Node. Now, here's the thing. The North Node is very much about our purpose. And there's a very important karmic or fated aspect to the interpretation of the North Node. And here it is, it's in the sign of Cancer. And there are two things about Cancer which I think are interesting here. The first is the link with family. So my guess is that you're working with one individual, but you end up working with the family.
Yes, that's so true. That's so true. I'll have a client come, and before I know where I am, I'm literally looking after the whole family. This happens, 9 times out of 10. That happens. The husband will come or the wife will come first, and then the other one saying, "Oh, what are you doing there?" And then they have the children, and so on and so forth. And so, yes, I'm always 9 times out of 10 working with a complete family, not just one individual. And it's lovely because with my work, it has a knock-on effect. So, if you're working on one member of the family, we're clearing all inherited stuff anyway. So it's good.
I think for my own work as a therapist, I'm very conscious that it's about the family dynamic, that you very often need to look at the different family members so that they can support the healing of one of the individuals. And when you're doing that, you're actually healing the family dynamic, and there's something there that needs to be looked at. But with you, yeah, it's so obvious that you are actually, this is what you are meant to be doing, is focusing on family work. And I think the second thing is that I wonder whether you find that you're particularly working with women.
It varies, actually. At the moment, it's almost 50-50. It used to be mainly women. Now it's almost 50-50.
Yeah.
And some of my best work is with some of the men, and a lot of men are quite skeptical, or they say, just do it, just do the work and send the results to my wife. I don't want to know. They don't want to know because it frightens them a little bit, especially if you turn around and tell them that this happened to them when they were 10 and they remember it, and they go, "Oh, how did she know that? That's really spooky," But it's interesting that I do find, a woman who comes first will always end up bringing her husband, always. And vice versa, but men will come on their own first of all. Yes, and it is so interesting. Best work I've done has been with my mother and my father, I suppose. Really, my father, had a major stroke, a really major stroke, and they said he would never talk again, he'd never walk again, he'd never drive again. Nearly killed me. They said he was in the hospital for months. 11 days later, he was out of the hospital, and he's doing everything, he's fine, and that's 5 years ago now. But at the time, it was really weird because I was taking my daughter to Durham University for her to enroll, to start at uni there, and suddenly at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my face dropped, and my daughter said, "Mum, you look like you've got Bell's palsy," and I said, "I don't feel right." And I went in, I said, "Oh my God, I look like I've had a stroke or something." And it was exactly that same time that my father had the major stroke.
Oh, wow.
And I never realised until that point how connected he and I were.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, because the next question I was going to ask you was, has doing this work played a part in healing your own family? And then
yes, definitely. Yes, definitely.
So did you find that as you were learning about this, you were already beginning to apply it to your own family and your own history?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it's funny because not all of my family accept what I do, and they're a bit. When my mother years ago, when she got cancer, my brother was really, let mother go down the chemo route, let her do this. And I said, but what you don't understand is that if we let mother do that, it doesn't help all of us behind her. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, if I work on mother, I'm clearing all the inheritance. So I'm clearing it from you, I'm clearing it from me, my daughter, your sons. I'm clearing it all the way down the line. I said, that's what I'm doing. So we're not just looking at one individual. And it's quite funny because I've got a client, and every time she books in, she says to me, well, I don't know if it's doing anything for me, but my father's diabetes is really, really good. And, you know, and my mother says, when are you having another session with Beth? Because your father's really nice every time, because it just changes something. And it's just so funny, you know, because obviously she's got a lot of inherited stuff. But I have found many years ago, I was working on my mother. She had a pain on the left side and the left ovary. And so I worked on my mother, and then I had a phone call from my daughter who said, are you working on me? And I said, no. She said, I've got this terrible pain in my left ovary. I said, really? And then the next thing I thought, oh God, I've got a pain in my left ovary. And then my sister then phoned me and said, are you working on? I've got a pain in the left ovary. I said, oh my God, this is really going through all of us. So I really had to backtrack to get to the source of it and find out what was creating it and then clear it. You know, and that's the exciting thing, is unraveling it, you know, and unraveling it. And you can see the patterns there, which always totally amazes me all the time, you know, because, you know, when you look at things, and I say to people, especially my clients who come with cancer or lymphoma, and I'll say to them, did you have tonsillitis as a child? And they'll say, yes. And I said, did you have glandular fever? Yes. And I say, okay, that's fine, that's enough, because it then goes on to become the lymphoma, the cancer, and so on and so forth, because it's going into the lymph system. So we then have to go back to the beginning and say, well, where did this start? You know, and it will be hereditary 9 times out of 10. And there's so much work to be done with things such as EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, because that can live in the body for over 100 years. You know, it can be dormant, and there's so many different strains of it, and people don't realize the connection with things like that, and the connection with food, with things. You know, I always say histamine is we call that drama. So if someone's got hay fever, it's addiction to drama, and it will be because something has happened. And that's then, you know, my children had a big shock in regards to their father when they were younger, and their reaction was it threw their histamine levels out, which then created, for my son, hay fever, and for my daughter, it created her, it caused her to become allergic to her cat. But they're all histamine related, and of course there'll be triggers with the histamine. You can rebalance them, and there'll be certain foods that trigger the histamine. I mean, I always say to people, if you have hay fever, please don't eat spinach, please don't eat strawberries until you've cleared the hay fever, because these are triggers for throwing the histamine out, you know. And it's interesting again, because they'll be hereditary again, you know. It's interesting, isn't it?
Well, I was thinking about your what you said about the link with your father being so strong, and I notice there that we have Neptune sitting in the 4th house, which is linked with father, and Neptune is a planet that is about fusion. There's no boundaries, and I think, you know, that can be problematic, of course, but it can also be an incredibly psychic connection.
Okay, yes, interesting.
I think what you described there was a very psychic connection. Neptune is also about healing and empathy. And if you recall, when we first started talking, and I was focusing on the 3 planets in your 10th house in Taurus, all of them are opposite the planet Neptune. So it adds the psychic dimension to the work that you're doing. It goes beyond, it's not just reading the body in terms of body language. It goes beyond physical. So we begin by talking about the physical. We're looking at the Taurus element there. but then it's opposite Neptune, which indicates tremendous intuition. And it's about seeing beyond the physical. So it's going beyond the physical. And I think that's why so much of what you're talking about sounds like a psychic.
Right, yes.
And so I wonder whether you've ever considered mediumship.
I did many years ago, but the reason I didn't is because I felt very, very drawn to health. I mean, I never did any of this before. I mean, years ago, I never did any of this at all. And then I nearly died having my daughter. And so I gave up working in the city in London and in banking, and decided to be at home with her. But I needed to do something. So I became a reflexologist.
Yeah.
And that's how so I nearly died with having her, became a reflexologist, and then was told I'd never be able to have any more children, and then started, you know, helping people to become pregnant. So I then myself got pregnant, and my son, who's 20, I've treated him all his life. He had E. coli, septicemia, Australian meningitis, gross kidney reflux, just to name but a few things. And I've treated him all my life. So, and he's very strong and, you know, not fazed by anything. And yeah, very strong. So, and I was very, very lucky to be where I live. I live near Cambridge. So Adam Brooks in Cambridge, the consultant there, was very, very good and let me work alongside him. So Henry had homeopathy, you know, and touch wood, he's 20 and he's fine. So so it's great. So I'm really, really happy. But I kind of fell into this. I didn't think I would ever be doing any of this. And it's just weird, you know. And yet, you know, when I, you know, so going back to your thing about the medium thing, I felt that there's a lot of great mediums out there. I don't need to be doing that. What I need to be doing is playing a medium, if you like, or detective with the body, and helping, you know, ancestors and stuff. As a child, at age 20, in my 20s, the one thing I used to say is when somebody said to me, "What is it you want to do?" And I said, at age 27, before I went off around the world for 2 years, I want to help people change their karma. I had no idea at that point what that meant to me. You know, I had no idea what it meant to me. And now, you know, I'm very lucky. I've got somebody in my family that did the family tree going back quite a long time. And I found out that my great grandmother, she was one of the first slaves in the West Indies, and she was a slave for Elizabeth Grant, and a Scottish man came along and he bought her, and then he freed her and married her, and then they moved, I think, to France, and had a couple of children, one of which married a Frenchman, you know, and then ended up in over an island. So it's really interesting when you look at it all and you put it all together. It's great. So I quite often think about them and think, right, where does that come from? You know, and I can see so many different things. You know, I look at my father's side of the family, and I can look at the links with illness, going back to what their jobs were, their roles were. And if anybody's ever been to the Cadbury's, you know, museum up in Birmingham, I think it is, if you ever go there and you look at the history of Cadbury's chocolate, and you'll see there are all these people with no teeth, and it was from the metals, you know. But of course we don't look at things like that. We're so unaware of that. You know, we you know, and I say that's the thing that fascinates me, of all these things that are around us, that play a part. And sometimes if there's an imbalance of a frequency, it really tips things over, you know. And that's the thing, is knowing, you know, knowing where you need to clear something. And heavy metals is always one.
You were talking about how giving birth to your daughter was a life-threatening experience, and of course, therefore, a life-changing experience. And so I just looked at the 5th house, which is the house to do with children, and there is Scorpio on the cusp there, which immediately talks about children being, and I know that this is true for everybody, having a child is a life-changing experience, yes. But on the spectrum, this is an extreme life-changing experience. Yes. And I think that that's what you would expect there with Scorpio. Because to go from banking to reflexology is a huge change. And I did wonder whether you had done something in finance, because you've got Pluto sitting in your 2nd house and Saturn in your 8th originally, and that they're both linked with money and resources. And I often see people with planets in the 8th house involved in finance. So that's because it's just highlighted. But the other thing I see, of course, is Uranus in your 2nd house, and along with Pluto. And Uranus is unconventional. It's different. So, you know, it's a different way of earning money. It's a different way of using resources, acquiring resources. It's unconventional. And I think sorry, there's a thought that's somewhere in the recesses of my mind that I'm trying to bring forward. A bit resistant, but I know that there's a flash in there. But I wonder then, because I'm looking at Pluto in the 2nd and Saturn in the 8th, I wonder whether there is a history in your family to do with finance and banking, etc.
Yes, my father was a stockbroker. And so there's quite a lot of finance in the family as well. And yes, and funny enough, I not only did finance, but I did shipping, and it turned out that my great grandfather was an engineer and built ships as well. So you know, and kind of traveled around the world long before people were actually doing that as a going on holiday type thing. So it's quite exciting.
Well, did you say that it was you or your father who was involved in shipping?
I was, and my father's father's father or something was you know, quite a way back. Yes, my father was always in finance.
I just wondered because of Neptune being in your 4th house, and of course, you know, that did make me think of shipping when you were talking about it. But I wondered whether you or your father. But yeah. I can certainly see that it's in Scorpio as well. Well, it's funny because I can't think of a single time when I have looked at a birth chart where after all of this time talking, I haven't yet looked at the sun. And it's because everything else just seems to stand out in relation to what you do so well. But you have the sun in Gemini. And so I think it's time for us to have a little look at that, along with the house that Venus in the North Node and the sun are all in. So the sun is in Gemini. And I think the obvious thing to say is that this is about communication and it's about learning. So I'm wondering whether you have written any books or done anything along those lines.
I was supposed to. I have a book title. I have written little bits in my book. My book is called "It Makes Perfect Sense," explaining what I do, because a lot of people try to overcomplicate things, and I think it doesn't need to be complicated. And so, yes, I am writing a book. I do write articles. I do teach. So, yes, is the answer to all of those questions. I was hoping to have actually, in lockdown, thought, great, I have time to write my book, but I was so busy because the amount of people who, particular people like comedians and things like that, because they couldn't perform, they just needed my help, really, just to bring them up and make them feel good about themselves. So I've been very, very busy, and so I didn't get a chance to do the book, but it is coming. The book is coming, and as I said, it's all based on about making sense of things without complicating it, because I'm slightly dyslexic. And I didn't know until a couple of years ago. And I knew I wasn't stupid, but I didn't realise that I could look at a word, no matter how I tried, I couldn't say it. And there's so many people out there who are like that. And then you're sitting battling with this word. And for me, trying to write a book, you can imagine it's a bit of a struggle. But I thought, no, I'm going to keep it all simple. So if I keep it simple, then everyone will understand it, and hopefully as we go on in, forward in time as well, that people will recognize if they have a struggle with a word, they will say, because 9 times out of 10, there'll be somebody else who says, well, I can't read that either, and with dyslexia, it's got these other great gifts with it. So I always say to people, it's not going to hold you back. You've just got to be able to say, well, I can't read that. Can someone say it to me? And once somebody said it to you a few times, then you'll be able to, the brain will then click in and read it then. But it's that knowingness, isn't it, with things. So yes, I'm writing things, I'm writing articles. The more as time goes on, I will be doing much more of that, because I think in this day and age we should come back to ourselves and realize that the work I do, we can all do. It's not you don't have to be a doctor to be able to do it. You can all do it, and it's so simple. And the thing is to keep things easy, and then people go, when they try it themselves, they go, wow, how did I do that? But all they're doing is actually tapping into their inner self, into their heart space, if you like. Yeah. So that's the thing,
Well, the sun, and we've already talked about Venus and the North Node, they're all sitting in the 11th house. And there's different ways of looking at this house. I would say it's highly humanitarian and to a certain extent idealistic, but it's also a house that is friendly. So, you would have a wide connection with people. So it's about connecting with people, having lots of connections. And I imagine that you network very well.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
We could say a wide circle of friends, but that doesn't cover it. This is a wide network.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Which is rather wonderful. So I think at this point, we've had a whistle-stop tour of your chart. And I wanted to say, if people would like to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
Well, they can, my name is Beth Foley, and my website address is www.balancingemotions.co.uk.
So I'll make sure that's on the notes. And people should also know that we are going to be doing a podcast specifically about your work for In the Light Growing Your Soul, my In the Light Growing Your Soul podcast. So I will put a link to that on the notes too, so that people can listen in greater detail as to what it actually is that you do, Beth.
Good.
Explanation given. So thank you very much for joining us on Life Astrologer today.
Lovely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you. It's been very good and so apt. I'm glad I'm actually fulfilling my life purpose. So that's good. That's great.